In today's video, we're talking Commercial Drive. We're going to explore this neighborhood. I'm going to show you the pros and the cons, all types of housing options that you're going to find on Commercial Drive. By the end of this video, you're going to know if you want to live on Commercial Drive, but more importantly, if you want to avoid it. Let's get into it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team, and welcome back to the channel. As always, this channel is about moving to and living in Vancouver. Every single week, I put out videos just like this one. And this week, we're exploring one of my favorite parts of Metro Vancouver, and that is the Commercial Drive neighborhood of Vancouver. This Vancouver neighborhood is probably one of the most iconic neighborhoods you are going to find anywhere. But before we get into who lives here, why you might want to live here, and why you might not want to live here, let's set some ground rules, and essentially, let's talk about exactly where we are. So where is Commercial Drive? Commercial Drive is on the east side of Vancouver. And as you know, we split the city of Vancouver onto the east side and the west side. And the east side of Vancouver is where we find ourselves at the moment on Commercial Drive. Commercial Drive is nestled in between Hastings Sunrise and Kensington Cedar Cottage, roughly. Both of those areas are incredibly strong, desirable neighborhoods as well. But Commercial Drive is a level above. It is an iconic neighborhood. It is a place that draws people from all over Vancouver, and not just Vancouver, but all over Metro Vancouver, maybe to live, but certainly to come and hang out. So it stands on its own in a way that many Vancouver neighborhoods don't or can't. There are a few that maybe compete in a similar way, like the West End, or obviously downtown, Yaletown, Main Street, Kitsilano. Those are other really iconic neighborhoods in Vancouver, but Commercial Drive is a neighborhood that you definitely want to be aware of. And it begins down to the north, that would be that way at Venables, and to the south, roughly about 16th, that I think is a little more questionable, a little bit more arguable exactly where Commercial Drive ends. But technically, Commercial Drive ends at 16th. And then to the east, you're going to find it ending on Nanaimo Street, and to the west at Clark Drive. And those are the streets where everything within that area is Commercial Drive. And that's the area that we're going to be exploring now. I want to talk about housing, and I'm walking through some of my favorite parts of Commercial Drive, Grandview Woodlands, some of the nicest family neighborhoods, single family detached neighborhoods that you're going to find anywhere in the city, in my opinion. And it's part of the reason that this area is so incredibly popular. But these streets are green and leafy, tree-lined, beautiful homes. As I'm walking around, you're going to see in behind me, I just walked by a really beautiful newer house. There's a real diversity of housing, from condos, social housing, in fact, tons of older apartment buildings, lots of rental stock, to stately Edwardian mansions. And it's a little unusual in our city to see this kind of diversity, because if, you know, the other area that you're going to see those kind of mansions we're going to find those in Shaughnessy, and there's definitely very little diversity in Shaughnessy. But let me talk about, actually, let me see which way I'm going to go here. I think I'm going to go down this street over here, and I'm just cutting through. This Lakewood is the street that I'm just crossing at the moment. You might have noticed a few bikes passing by as I started talking. This is one of our bike paths, and they crisscross through the city all over the place, but that's one of the main arteries that you're going to be able to cut through the city on a bike, and do so quite safely. A little bit controversial, but at this point, I think most people have accepted that we have a lot of bike paths, a lot of bike lanes, and you're going to find a lot of that around Commercial Drive. But these houses, we are walking through probably one of the more expensive parts of Commercial Drive, but in general, Commercial Drive is a more affordable housing option compared to much of the rest of the city. So in the spring of 2025, what we find ourselves in right now, a typical house on Commercial Drive is $1,812,500. So just over $1.8 million. And that's in comparison to just over $2.6 million for the entire city. Check out those eagles. That's pretty cool. These Vancouver specials, this is sort of an older type of Vancouver special, but it's really common to have these kind of little statues in front of these houses. I haven't seen an eagle before, so that's pretty unique. And then we're walking past a couple newer houses. These houses are definitely going to be worth well over $1.8 million. Brand new house being built right here. And aside from houses, you also see a lot of duplexes on Commercial Drive and a fair number of townhouse options as well. So a little more affordability there. However, in comparison to the rest of the city, the prices for duplexes and townhouses are a little bit higher here on Commercial Drive. The typical townhouse is $1,416,400. The typical amount for the city, $1,351,400. So a little more expensive. And I would say that is because they're going to be a little bit larger. Often there's a lot of newer stock here on Commercial Drive as well. And that will drive the price up. You're going to get a little more for your money me here on Commercial Drive than you will in other parts of the city. But again, a lot of options when it comes to housing styles and housing types and affordability. And you can find really old duplexes and you can find brand new ones. You can find relatively small ones and you can find relatively large ones. And the same thing is true with townhouses. And there are pockets that are going to be more affordable, sort of heading further north, and then heading further south is typically going to be more expensive. Closer to Trout Lake is going to be more expensive. Often, sort of in this area, this pocket that I'm in right now, that's more or less to the east, a little bit closer to Nanaimo. East of Victoria is also going to be a little bit more expensive. And then in terms of condos, the condo prices are definitely where you're going to see a considerable value here. A typical condo on Commercial Drive is $660,400 versus a typical condo in the rest of Vancouver is $808,000. So once again, that is because there is a great amount of diversity in the condo styles that you're going to find. Quite a few older buildings, quite a few of those wood frame 4-story buildings, some of them walk-ups, but mostly with elevators. But quite often those older buildings will have shared laundry rather than in-suite laundry. They're not going to be quite as modern, but they're perfectly livable, make great investments, an excellent entry point for first-time buyers as well, and young families. And then at the same time, there's also a lot of new development happening. And so considerable amount of new construction that is happening, big condo towers. In fact, the Safeway site at the Commercial Drive SkyTrain station is very controversial, but that looks like it's moving forward with 3 massive towers, about 1,000 rental units. They're not going to be for sale at this point. There is a lot of rental being built in Vancouver. The city is really promoting rental over anything else. And this is an environment right now where a lot of developers are finding constructing strata for sale developments isn't really feasible. And they're finding that rentals are working better for them. And so this is something that's been ongoing for about 10 years and it's gone back and forth. And finally, we're moving forward with, or it appears we're moving forward. I think it's going in front of council in the next couple of weeks to vote on, but that there's a massive amount of new development that's going to be going in and around the Commercial Drive SkyTrain station. And that's really going to impact what it's like to live in that area and rental rates. And it's really going to impact the type of housing that will be available in the future, much more high density development in that area in particular. And I'm getting close right now to the intersection of Nanaimo and Broadway. And there's quite a lot of construction that's happening in that area as well. Lots of new buildings being built. And that's part of the fabric of Commercial Drive. But there's also a lot of history here. And as I walk around, you're going to notice in the background these older houses. And part of the reason that this is a quote unquote more affordable part of the city is that we also have a lot of smaller lots. And so there's some areas that were developed really as luxury. So in the early 1900s, they were constructing, or the plan was to essentially develop an area that was similar to Shaughnessy and similar to some of the developments that were happening in the West End as well. And there's some really big, massive, stately Edwardian mansions. And then there's a lot of really small lots. And, they were built just for the average worker. And so there's a lot of really small, little old houses on small lots. And then much larger, older houses like the ones that are in behind me here. And so many of these, like this house right here is a perfect example. An older house, probably at least 100 years old, that has been really meticulously maintained and upgraded and turned into something really spectacular. And there's so many people that have invested so much into this community and settled their families. So it's become such a wonderful family neighborhood that, this is a neighborhood where you're going to find kids playing on the street, people working in their yards, a lot of pride of ownership and a connection amongst the community. So you're going to find a lot of housing diversity, relative affordability, but of course, in comparison to the rest of Canada, this is still an expensive piece of real estate. And one of the other things that I find quite interesting about Commercial Drive is the alternative housing styles and types that you're going to find on Commercial Drive. And I've mentioned social housing being something that's more common on Commercial Drive than in other areas. It's also an area that the city has allowed a little more flexibility and experimentation when it comes to different kinds of housing types. So it's an area where duplexes have been much more common and much earlier than in other parts of the city. And you see quite a lot of older duplexes, which is a bit unusual. It's not something that's terribly common until perhaps really just the last 5 years. It's something that we're seeing sprout up as the city changed the zoning regulations and allowed duplexes on every single family. This is one of the earliest areas that you're going to find duplexes being much more common. It's also an area, especially to the north of Commercial Drive, the northern end, where you see a lot more townhouse development, but then you also see a lot more sort of laneway houses being much more common, and social housing and sort of these, let's try this in this area and see how it goes. So this is an area where you see the city has traditionally been much more flexible in the kinds of developments that are happening, which increases affordability. There's greater density and greater sort of variety in the kind of housing options that you're going to come across. So this is one spot where you don't have to sort of pin yourself so much to one particular housing style and just kind of be open to what you might come across, whether it's a larger 3-bedroom condo, perhaps a laneway house that you can purchase, or a large townhouse that works for you and your family rather than a single family residential house. Of course, let's also talk about rents. You are going to find on Commercial Drive, as I mentioned, a lot of diversity of housing styles and types, from extreme luxury. And I did mention a lot of social housing, probably more social housing than you're going to find in most parts of the city. And as a result, there's a lot of diversity of lifestyles and a lot of diversity of people. And in terms of rents, there's a lot of options when it comes to rents. You can rent a brand new luxurious townhouse or a house, but there is a lot of older housing stock that brings the rental rates down considerably. So this is, just as with purchasing, this is a more affordable place to be renting. And you're looking at about $1,800 a month for a 1-bedroom in Commercial Drive. And again, this is in spring of 2025. And these rates are based on CMHC numbers that I pulled from October of 2024. So they're a little bit out of date, and our rental market is on the downward slope. Things are a little softer. This is a great time to be looking either at renting or purchasing. But renting, typical 1-bedroom is about $1,800 a month. Typical 2-bedroom is about $2,400 a month. And then a typical 3-bedroom is $2,900, just shy of $3,000 a month. So once again, this is a little bit more affordable than you're going to find in the more expensive parts of the city and of Metro Vancouver. Whether you ultimately move to Commercial Drive or anywhere else in Metro Vancouver to purchase a home, don't forget that I'm a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of families settle in Vancouver, find the right neighborhood, and find the right home. I can help you and your family as well. My contact information is going to be right there on the screen. All it is a conversation. Reach out anytime and we can get that ball rolling. But for now, let's get back to the video. So now we're going to explore some of the pros and the cons of living on Commercial Drive. What is the big draw? Why are people so excited about living on Commercial Drive, and what makes it kind of unique in the city? Well, number one is its location. I don't know if we can see it. No, we can't see it right now, but it is just over my right shoulder. That's downtown, just off in the distance. I mean, we can't be more than, I don't know, a couple kilometers from downtown Vancouver. So you're just east of the downtown core and you're not paying downtown prices. This is about as close as you can get to downtown without actually paying for it. And you can drive there. Obviously, it's a bit of a pain to drive to because there's quite a lot of traffic between here and downtown Vancouver, but you can also find a lot of alternatives. And even just walking downtown is reasonable. I mean, I might not choose to do it in the middle of winter, but on a day like today, in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, it's a beautiful walk. And as you walk, the reason one of the alternative names for the area we're in, Commercial Drive, more that the way that the city refers to it is Grandview Woodlands and Grandview. We are on this rise just east of downtown, and the views can be really spectacular of downtown and of the North Shore Mountains. So it's a beautiful walk. It's an amazing bike ride. Some of the first bike paths into the city were coming out of Commercial Drive. And on top of that, of course, we just have all of the usual alternatives to getting around, like scooter share and a bike share, and there's Uber and Lyft and taxis, of course. But aside from buses and public transit, there is also the SkyTrain. And one of the busiest SkyTrain stations in all of Metro Vancouver is right here at the Commercial Drive SkyTrain station. It just takes a couple minutes to get downtown. If you want to go to a hockey game or to a Whitecaps game, or this weekend, I'm going to a Vancouver Warriors lacrosse game and they're going to win and make it to the finals. But whatever it is that you want to do downtown, you can do it from here really, really easily. And that is one of the things that people really love about living here. Just the accessibility, not just downtown, but all over Metro Vancouver. And getting onto the highway is relatively simple from here. Getting up into the North Shore and into the mountains, into the forests and woods, and all of that is really feasible and possible from a spot like Commercial Drive. Another thing that people love about living on Commercial Drive is the access to amenities. And truly, amenities are off the charts on Commercial Drive. I can't think of a place that has better access than Commercial Drive, really, in all of Vancouver, and really, in a lot of ways, all of Metro Vancouver. So number one is really that access to SkyTrain. I touched on it a little bit before, but it is second to none. You have one of the busiest SkyTrain stations that at the moment is a hub for two of the major SkyTrain routes, and soon to be a third, that Arbutus corridor. So access east and west from Commercial Drive is exceptional. I already mentioned getting into downtown Vancouver. Getting out into the suburbs is really easy from here, and also soon getting onto the west side of Vancouver along the Arbutus corridor is definitely going to be a strong possibility from here. The result of that being a hub of transit is that we are going to see a lot more development happening, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But aside from that transit connection, which is an enormous pro, I can't talk enough about that. So many people are really driven to this neighborhood because of that strong accessibility and network of transit throughout Metro Vancouver. It's really the shops and the services that you find on Commercial Drive, and there's really no place where there's a more eclectic mix of shops and services. And you go from really those traditional businesses that have been here for 50, 60, 70 years that cater to the traditional demographics of the neighborhood, those Italian and Portuguese roots, to things that are much more eclectic, new, and unique. And there's all sorts of really interesting shops and services that you're going to find on Commercial Drive, which makes it a really interesting place. It's ever changing and super dynamic and vibrant, and it makes it one of those places that's always interesting to explore as a result. On top of all those shops and services, you have nightlife that you don't really see in much of Vancouver or Metro Vancouver, and it is a bit unique outside the downtown core. One of the large criticisms of living in Vancouver is that there's not much in the way of nightlife, and certainly not much in the way of nightlife that you would imagine that you'd want in your 20s. There's no real discos or nightclubs, or very little of it. They don't, if we have them, they don't stay open all that late, and they're pretty sparsely attended. But what we do have on Commercial Drive is this vast assortment of restaurants and cafes and bars. And so if you're a little bit older, if you're a little more settled, perhaps in your late 20s, 30s, up until your 60s, I would say, there's really something to do almost at every hour. I mean, certainly not, say, from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. There's a point where things shut down, even here on Commercial Drive. But pretty much any other hour of the day, you're going to find a place to hang out and spend some time, whether it's a date night or spending time with friends or just letting loose a little bit. There are options on Commercial Drive, which brings people not just to live here, but also people to come here from all parts of Metro Vancouver to experience what Commercial Drive can offer. And then unusually for really any community in the city of Vancouver is that there are two community centers here. Not just community centers, we also have schools, of course, and you have elementary schools just like everywhere else. Same thing with secondary schools as well as private schools. But in terms of those community centers, unusually there are two of them, one at the north end and one at the south end. And to the north, we have Britannia, which is attached to the Britannia Secondary School. And it's a bit of an aging facility. There's no doubt about that. But you do have a decent pool, although it's incredibly cold. I don't recommend it for young children. And they have an ice rink there as well, and a little public library. So great facilities, a little bit old. They're talking about perhaps getting that replaced at some point in the not too distant future. But to the south end, what we have is a really new facility, and that is the Trout Lake Community Center. They're at Trout Lake, which is really one of the gems of Commercial Drive. And I should talk a little bit about the parks, like the one that I'm at right now, Victoria Park. That's more to the northern end of Commercial Drive, but to the southern end, you have Trout Lake, which is the only freshwater lake in the city of Vancouver. You can swim there in the summer months. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's an incredibly popular park, and I used to live very close to it. I love Trout Lake. But coming back to those community centers, the Trout Lake Community Center is one of the jewels in the community center system. It's really new. It was built for the Winter Olympics in 2010 as a practice facility for the hockey teams at the time. So there's a great ice rink. There's also an incredible library and a gym, and there's a daycare there as well. But a really fantastic amenity for the community there at Trout Lake and also at Britannia. And finally, the other thing that I want to talk about is sort of the vibrancy and how dynamic the neighborhood is. And we have these really fun festivals that are throughout the city, really, but Commercial Drive specifically is at the heart of a lot of those festivals. Specifically, what you have on Commercial Drive, this long-standing Dyke March that happens on an annual basis, but also we have car-free days that pretty much got their start here on Commercial Drive. I think it was about 2005. It's something that started here and has moved. Main Street has one now, the West End has one, Kitsilano has one, but it all started here. And on top of that, you also have Italian days, going back to those cultural roots of early immigrant population here on Commercial Drive, and one of those founding cultures that we find, and that is a lot of fun as well. And then because of those European roots that you find on Commercial Drive, this is the one place, if there is any soccer going on that of any significance in the world, this is the place to come in and watch it. There's always something going on around World Cup or the Euros, people very proudly wearing their colors and cheering for their favorite teams and doing it in a very cohesive, agreeable way. You know, this isn't a place where you're going to see any kind of riots when it comes to soccer or any kind of violence. When it comes to hockey, that's another story. We're not going to get into that right now, but in terms of soccer, this is the place that you want to come to if you want to watch a really fun soccer experience. So Commercial Drive, amenities off the chart. Huge pro of living on Commercial Drive is the amenities that you find here. And walkability is really something that is a huge bonus of living here. I mean, I've talked about walkability in a number of my videos, and I think it's really a strength of so many of our communities in the city of Vancouver specifically. But Commercial Drive stands alone, perhaps, as one of the most walkable places that you could imagine. And perhaps the closer you are to the SkyTrain station that is up at Broadway and Commercial, it's going to increase the walkability for you. You can just hop on the SkyTrain to get downtown or get out to Metrotown, or, you can take a bus over to the North Shore pretty easily, or take the SkyTrain and get onto the C bus downtown to get to the North Shore. But the types of services that you have, the schools being so close, the community centers, the restaurants, the nightlife, more than any other community, this is a place you really don't need to go far to get to the things that you want. And to have such an incredible diversity of offerings is really honestly unusual. So if you want to have a car-free and walkable lifestyle, this is a place that you need to have at the top of your list. Affordability is yet another pro of living on Commercial Drive, and I touched on that in the housing. It's primarily around housing, whether you're renting or buying. And yes, this is all relative. So in terms of Canadian averages, Commercial Drive is not going to be cheap. But in terms of what you find in the city of Vancouver, especially for what it offers, there is relative affordability. And because of that diversity of housing options that I talked about, like, you can spend a boatload of money on Commercial Drive. You could easily spend $7,000 a month in renting a really nicely finished, relatively new house here. But you can also probably find a one bedroom down well below the average for Metro Vancouver. It's probably going to be smaller. It's probably going to be in a basement. It probably is going to have shared laundry, but the options exist here on Commercial Drive. And that's not something that we can say about every place. And so there is a really strong level of affordability, not just about housing, I should point out as well, but because of the walkability, you don't necessarily need a car because of the access to transit. Transit is super reliable, super frequent, and relatively easy to use when you live here. And also food. You have a lot of little ethnic groceries on Commercial Drive, and you have a lot of little hole-in-the-wall type food establishments, relatively fast food. But this isn't a place where you have to spend a lot of money. It's a place where you can spend a lot of money if you're not careful, but you definitely don't need to be spending a lot to live on Commercial Drive. And lastly, I just want to talk about the diversity, because I do think that's one of the things that makes this such an interesting, vibrant place to live. And it's not necessarily the experience that people have in every part of Vancouver or in every part of Metro Vancouver, despite the amount of people that we have that have come here from somewhere else. But this is a place that so many new immigrants sort of settle into first. And there really is an openness and a diversity here. I talked a little bit about the political leanings, certainly more left-leaning than right-leaning. And that, again, is a reflection of the openness of the society here. So no matter who you are and where you come from, no matter how much money you have, this is definitely one of those areas that you're probably going to be able to find a home and feel comfort in. You're not going to be judged. You're going to be accepted. You're going to have a little bit of, there might be some crazy things that you see and experience, but every day is going to be interesting. I can promise you, living on Commercial Drive. Now it's time for those cons. Every place has cons, even Commercial Drive. I did honestly find it much easier to come up with a whole bunch of pros than I did cons, but there are some, and you should be aware of those if you're thinking of moving here. So perhaps what is the biggest con of living on Commercial Drive? I would say it's the unhoused population. We are, as I mentioned, just east of the downtown core and the downtown east side. And this is really the first major residential community east of the downtown east side, with the exception of Strathcona, I would say. But this is the first stop heading east from the downtown east side, pretty much. And as a result, you have still a pretty strong connection to what is happening on the downtown east side. It is an area that you're going to see a lot of unhoused population. And so people that are down and out, people that are struggling, people that have mental illness, there's certainly a strong presence on Commercial Drive. And along with that comes a certain amount of impact on crime. I don't think there's too much that I'd worry about physically. Like, this is crime. I try and talk about this quite a bit. The kind of crime that we worry about here in Vancouver isn't the same crime that you're going to need to worry about in New York City or Chicago or in other major international cities. On a Canadian basis, Canada is an incredibly safe country. Vancouver is still an incredibly safe city. I don't worry about getting mugged, getting carjacked, someone getting raped. Those aren't things that you necessarily need to worry about here. But what you do need to worry about is petty crime. Somebody breaking into your car, somebody stealing your bike, somebody grabbing the barbecue off your back porch. Those are things that can happen on Commercial Drive. And a greater proximity to Commercial Drive itself and greater proximity to the SkyTrain station, or to the north, I would say closer to Hastings. Those are areas where you're going to see a little more petty crime than you're going to see elsewhere. But again, you just kind of need to be aware and be aware of what's happening. And perhaps to a certain degree, you also need to be aware about the nightlife. And as I said, that's one of the big pros of living here. But, you know, when people are out drinking and there's a younger population, there are things that can happen out and about, and especially when alcohol or drugs are involved. So you do want to be a little bit aware. And this is a place where stuff can happen because of those dynamics at play. But all in all, it is still a safe place. It is a place that so many people are very happily and excitedly living with their families and bringing up children. And you very much see a lot of families. I don't know if you can tell by just looking over my shoulder and seeing the homes in the background, but this is a family neighborhood. Also a very diverse neighborhood with a very diverse population. And one of those populations is a big presence of the unhoused. The next con of living on Commercial Drive is really traffic. This is an area that's kind of surrounded by a lot of traffic, a lot of busy streets. So it's bounded to the west by Clark, which is essentially, we don't have an inner city highway, but if we did, it would be Clark Drive. It is the main route for trucks to get to and from the port. It is one of the main entrances into the city, and it's an incredibly busy, if we're being honest with one another, it's kind of an ugly street. If there is an ugly street in Vancouver, that would be my number one choice. So Knight Street is over there to the west. Then you also have East First that runs right through Commercial Drive, which is one of the main arteries from downtown out to the Trans-Canada Highway, or vice versa. So that gets incredibly busy at rush hour. You also have Broadway and 12th running right through the middle of Commercial Drive. And these are all really busy streets. And when it is rush hour, this can be an area that gets really clogged up. It makes a lot more sense not to drive, but if you have to drive, avoid rush hour, avoid those busy streets. And the other thing that ends up happening in this area is a lot of these streets are traffic calmed. That makes it super annoying to try and drive through here, because before they traffic calm these streets, so many people would cut through these neighborhoods. And of course, that didn't make them safe, didn't make them super pleasant to be living in. And so it was much worse to be living here before those traffic calming elements were brought in, much less safe, I would say. And those traffic calming elements have proven to be quite a benefit to the community, but make it, I would say, a little bit annoying for people who aren't familiar with the streets and how to get around here. Because all of a sudden, you can't make a left turn, you got to make a right turn. There's a dead end street here, there's a dead end street there. All of those things, if you live here, you're obviously going to become very familiar with. But for those who don't live here or don't spend a lot of time on Commercial Drive, it can be really, really confusing on how to get around sometimes. One last con of living here on Commercial Drive would be the amount of development that is expected and coming to this area. It's the reality of living in pretty much everywhere in Metro Vancouver, the amount things that are changing and the kind of density that is expected and being brought in. We're living in an era where pretty much local governments are opening the doors to development, and Commercial Drive is one of those areas that's going to see massive changes over the coming years. If you're ever curious about what the future for an area holds, be sure to double check the city's website. In this case, we're in the city of Vancouver. So many of the communities in Vancouver have overriding community plans, and those are the main plans for development in the area. Grandview Woodland is the area that Commercial Drive is referred to by the city of Vancouver. So there is a Grandview Woodland community plan. A lot of that development is centered around the Commercial Drive SkyTrain station. This was before the province sort of forced the hand of all municipalities to increase density really significantly around transit hubs and specifically SkyTrain stations. But the city was a big proponent of allowing a lot of density around the Commercial Drive SkyTrain station. It's been going on for about a decade. It's super controversial, but we're getting close to it actually being pushed forward. And at the moment, what it looks like is that at the old Safeway site, just by the Commercial Drive SkyTrain station, they're going to allow just over 1,000 rental units in 3 new buildings. And one of those buildings is going to be as tall as 44 stories, which seems astonishing. Massive development. That is so not Commercial Drive, which is what a lot of the people here are really struggling with. Because yes, we have a great diversity of housing here on Commercial Drive, but a lot of it is sort of smaller. We don't have, what you don't have here when it comes to diversity of housing is really tall skyscrapers and massive concrete condo towers. You have a lot of reasonable, I would call it, density. And you have these small 4 to 6 story wood frame buildings that were built often in the 70s, even a little bit earlier, but 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you have quite a number of those. You can obviously see a lot of what I'm walking through, these single family residential houses. But the plan is for this super high density, really proximal to the SkyTrain station, and then stepping down from there. So maybe 44-story tower, but beyond that, 20 stories, 12 stories, 6 stories, getting down to townhouse developments and stepping then down to duplex, triplex type of developments. So if you want to settle into a neighborhood where nothing is going to change, where it's exactly the way it is today, really, honestly, Vancouver isn't really for you, but specifically a place like Commercial Drive, that's not going to be your experience. We're going to be living through a period of massive changes over the next 10 to 20 years. This has been ongoing for really my entire lifetime, but it's a continuing process. We live in a city with massive amounts of change. It's a living, breathing thing, and I don't expect that's going to change anytime soon. But just understand, everything that I'm showing you could change in the next few years, and you kind of need to accept that that's a possibility if you want to live in a community like this. All right, so now we get down to the question is this area for you? I mean, ultimately, I can't decide that for you, right? You have to decide that, and hopefully this video has helped you a lot to understand why you might want to live on Commercial Drive. I mean, if you like an urban environment, access to an even more urban environment and a densely populated neighborhood, if you want a lot of convenience, if you want walkability, and if you want a super tightly knit neighborhood, well, Commercial Drive may very well be for you. And typically, who it appeals to is a younger population. It is young professionals getting their start in life that very much often settle on Commercial Drive, and people who love all of those connections to their community. It's rare that you find people who are thinking of retiring coming to Commercial Drive, but it's not only those young professionals, it's also young families and people that are wanting to find a really nice family-oriented neighborhood with a little bit of access to that urban environment and are okay with a little bit of that grittiness. And usually people are a little more open, a little more creative, and a little more left-leaning in their political views. So if all of that is you, then perhaps Commercial Drive is going to be the right neighborhood for you. And if it's not, well, of course, you know that I'm a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of families just like yours find the right neighborhood. And if this one's not for you, or even if it is, but you want to buy a home, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And if you want to make sure you're making the right decision about Commercial Drive, there's a couple other videos just like this one that I did that I think you're going to want to check out. One I did on my own neighborhood. I used to live here on Commercial Drive, but now I live in Riley Park, and that video is right there. And then a video I did just a couple months ago on a Hastings sunrise, and that video is right here. Both those videos I think you definitely want to watch. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.